Jake Morrison stared out the window of his small ship as they approached New Vegas Station. The massive structure floated in space like a giant metal flower, its arms reaching out in all directions. Lights blinked across its surface, and ships of all sizes moved around it like busy insects. "Captain, we're getting clearance to dock," said Tony Rodriguez from the pilot seat. His voice was calm, but Jake could hear the nervousness underneath. This was the biggest day in human history, and they all knew it. "Thank you, Tony," Jake replied. He turned to look at his small team. Dr. Lisa Harper was reading through her notes for the 100th time, her blonde hair falling over her face as she bent over her tablet. She was the best alien life expert Earth had, even though she had never actually met an alien before today. "Lisa, you need to relax," Jake said with a smile. "You know more about the Zephyrians than anyone." Lisa looked up and pushed her hair back. "I know what our computers think about them, but meeting them face to face is different. They've been flying through space for thousands of years while we just figured out how to leave our solar system." The ship shuddered gently as it connected to the station. Through the speakers came a voice in perfect English. "Welcome to New Vegas Station. Please follow the blue lights to Docking Bay 7. Jake straightened his uniform and checked his appearance one more time. He was a tall man with dark hair and serious brown eyes. At 35, he was young for a captain, but he had earned his position through hard work and smart decisions. Today would test everything he had learned. The three humans walked through the station's corridors following the blue lights. Jake had read about New Vegas, but seeing it was different. The place was huge, with high ceilings and wide walkways. Shops and restaurants lined the walls, and beings from different worlds walked everywhere. Some looked almost human, while others were so strange that Jake had to stop himself from staring. "Look at this place," Tony whispered. He was a short, stocky man with quick eyes that noticed everything. "It's like a shopping mall, but for the whole galaxy." They reached a large door marked with symbols Jake couldn't read, but his translator device buzzed and showed "Diplomatic Meeting Room" in English. The door slid open with a soft hiss. The room beyond was circular with a high dome ceiling that showed the stars outside. In the center was a large table, and around it sat the strangest beings Jake had ever seen. The Zephyrians looked like they were made of living crystal. They were tall, maybe 8 feet, with bodies that seemed to be carved from clear blue stone. Light moved through them like water, and when they moved, tiny chimes could be heard. Their faces were sharp and angular, with eyes that glowed like blue stars. At the head of the table sat the largest of them. This had to be High Counselor Vexithara. She turned her glowing eyes toward the humans as they entered. "So," she said, her voice like music played on glass bells. "These are the humans. You are smaller than I expected." Jake stepped forward and bowed slightly. "High Counselor, I am Captain Jake Morrison. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." Vexithara made a sound that might have been laughter. "Do not thank me yet, small human. We have agreed to listen, nothing more. Your species is very young. You have been in space for what, 50 of your years? We have been traveling between stars for 5,000. Jake felt his team shift nervously behind him, but he kept his voice steady. "That's true, High Counselor, but we learn quickly, and we're eager to be good neighbors." "Neighbors?" Another Zephyrian spoke up. This one was slightly smaller, with darker blue crystal skin. "You wish to claim territory in our space. You want trade routes through systems we have controlled for centuries. What can you possibly offer us in return?" Dr. Harper stepped forward. "We have unique perspectives on science and technology. Our approach to problem-solving might complement your advanced knowledge." The Zephyrians made more chiming sounds, which Jake realized was their way of laughing. Vexithara stood up, her crystal body catching the light from the dome above. "Complement our knowledge? Child, we have forgotten more than your species has ever learned." The meeting continued for 2 hours, and it went badly. Everything the humans suggested, the Zephyrians dismissed. They spoke to Jake's team like adults talking to children who didn't understand the world. By the time they broke for dinner, Jake knew they were failing. The dining area was attached to the meeting room. The Zephyrians didn't eat food like humans did. Instead, they absorbed some kind of energy from small crystal devices. Jake and his team ate simple sandwiches in silence while the aliens continued their quiet discussions. That's when Jake noticed the game. 3 Zephyrians sat at a side table with what looked like cards made of thin crystal. But as Jake watched, he realized these weren't normal cards. They showed complex patterns that changed and shifted. The players would look at their cards, make calculations on small devices, then place colored stones in the center of the table. Jake watched for several minutes. One player would put down stones and the others would either match the bet or give up their cards. Sometimes a player would put down many stones even when their cards didn't look strong. Other players would study their devices, calculate odds, then make their decision based purely on mathematics. It's a probability game, Jake murmured to himself. What? Lisa asked, following his gaze. That game they're playing. It's about odds and betting, but also about reading your opponents. Jake's eyes lit up. It's basically poker. Tony nearly choked on his sandwich. You're thinking of challenging them to poker? Jake, these beings calculate faster than our computers. But, do they bluff? Jake asked. He stood up and walked over to the Zephyrian table. The 3 players looked up at him with their glowing eyes. Interesting game, Jake said. Mind if I watch? One of the players, who had introduced himself as war strategist Colventh, gestured to an empty chair. You may observe, human, though I doubt you will understand the complexity. Jake watched 3 more hands. The Zephyrians played with perfect mathematical precision. They calculated exact odds, bet accordingly, and never seemed to make emotional decisions. But Jake noticed something else. When they had good cards, their crystal bodies glowed slightly brighter. When they had bad cards, the light dimmed. After the 3rd hand, Jake stood up and cleared his throat. The entire dining area went quiet. Hi, Counselor, he called across the room. I have a proposal. Vexithera turned her glowing gaze on him. Another proposal? We have heard enough human proposals for one day. This one is different, Jake said, his heart pounding. I challenge you to a game. Your people against mine. Winner takes all. The silence in the room was complete. Even the soft background hum of the station seemed to stop. Vexithera slowly stood up. What kind of game, small human? Jake smiled, knowing he was about to make the biggest gamble in human history. Poker. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Jake could hear his own heartbeat as every eye in the dining area stared at him. Dr. Lisa Harper looked like she might faint, and Tony Rodriguez had gone completely pale. High Counselor Vexithera's crystal body flickered with different colors as she processed what Jake had just said. Her fellow Zephyrians made soft chiming sounds among themselves, their version of excited whispers. Poker? Vexithera finally said. This is a human game? Yes, Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. It's a card game involving strategy, probability, and reading your opponents, similar to what your people were just playing, but different. War strategist Colventh stood up from the gaming table. We know of this human game. Our databases contain information about many species, recreational activities. Poker involves deception and emotional manipulation, does it not? Among other things, yes, Jake said. Vexithera's eyes glowed brighter. How interesting. A species that considers deception a skill to be celebrated. She made a sound like breaking glass, which Jake realized was laughter. Very well, small human, I accept your challenge. But not for your simple diplomatic requests. Jake felt his stomach drop. What do you mean? If we are to play games, let us make them worthy of our time. Vexithera moved closer, her crystal form towering over Jake. When you lose, humanity will abandon all claims to this sector of space. You will return to your home system and remain there for 50 of your years. No exploration, no expansion, no contact with other species. And if we win? Jake asked, though his mouth felt dry. If you somehow defeat us, which our calculations show has a 0.3% probability, then humanity will receive full trading rights throughout Zephyrian space. You will be granted territorial claims to 12 star systems of your choosing, and we will sponsor your membership in the Galactic Council. Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. Captain, we need to discuss this privately. No, Vexithara said firmly. The human captain challenged us publicly. He must answer publicly. Do you accept these terms, Jake Morrison? Jake looked at his team. Lisa was shaking her head frantically. Tony looked like he wanted to run, but Jake thought about Earth, about humanity's future among the stars, about the chance to prove they belonged here. I accept, he said. The dining area erupted in chiming sounds from the Zephyrians and various noises from the other alien species present. Several beings immediately began speaking into communication devices, spreading word of the unprecedented challenge. Vexithara nodded approvingly. Excellent. We will need time to prepare. The game will take place tomorrow in the main amphitheater. It will be broadcast to both our civilizations and to anyone else who wishes to watch. She paused. I do hope your people will forgive you when you lose their future. As the Zephyrians filed out of the dining area, Jake's team surrounded him. Have you lost your mind? Lisa hissed. Jake, these beings calculate faster than supercomputers. They've probably already figured out every possible combination of cards and optimal betting strategies. That's exactly the point, Jake said quietly. They calculate everything, but poker isn't just about calculation. Tony ran his hands through his hair. Captain, with respect, you just bet humanity's entire future on a card game. Please tell me you have a plan. Jake sat down heavily in a chair. Now that the adrenaline was wearing off, he was beginning to realize what he had done. I have the beginning of a plan, but I need to know everything we can learn about Zephyrian psychology in the next 18 hours. Lisa pulled out her tablet and began typing rapidly. I'll contact Earth immediately. We need every expert we have working on this. She looked up at Jake. But you need to tell us why you think this will work. What did you see when you watched them play? They're predictable, Jake said. They calculate odds perfectly, but they have tells. When they have good hands, their crystal bodies glow brighter. When they have bad hands, they dim. They make decisions based purely on mathematics, never on instinct or deception. But they'll know poker rules and optimal strategies by tomorrow, Tony pointed out. Rules and strategies, yes, but not the psychology. Jake stood up and began pacing. Lisa, I need you to analyze everything we know about their species. How do they communicate? How do they make decisions? Do they understand concepts like misdirection or emotional manipulation? Lisa was already working. From what I've studied, Zephyrians are incredibly logical. They evolved from a crystalline life form that shared information through direct energy transfer. They've never needed to lie or deceive because they could always know what others were thinking. Perfect, Jake said. That's their weakness. Their weakness? Tony asked. Jake, not being able to lie sounds like an advantage in most situations. Not in poker. Jake sat back down. In poker, the ability to deceive and to detect deception is everything. They can calculate odds all they want, but if they can't bluff, and they can't read bluffs, they're playing with a massive disadvantage. Lisa looked up from her tablet. I'm getting responses from Earth already. The president is not happy. But they're sending every poker expert and psychologist they can find to help analyze the situation. What about the broadcast? Tony asked. The whole galaxy is going to watch humans either win big or fail spectacularly. Jake nodded grimly. I know. No pressure, right? Over the next several hours, Jake's communicator buzzed constantly with messages from Earth. Military advisors, politicians, and scientists all wanted to know what he was thinking. Some called him brave, others called him insane. His own mother sent a message saying she was proud but terrified. The most helpful communication came from an unexpected source. Danny Chen, a professional poker player from New Vegas on Earth. He was Tony's cousin, and when he heard about the challenge, he immediately sent detailed advice. Tell Jake that aliens who think purely mathematically will be easy to read, Danny's message said. They'll bet exactly what their cards are worth, nothing more, nothing less. The key is to make them make decisions their math can't solve. As the evening wore on, more information came in. Dr. Sarah Kim, Earth's leading expert on game theory, sent complex analyses of optimal poker strategies. But the most useful insight came from Dr. Robert Torres, a psychologist who specialized in first contact scenarios. The Zephyrians have never had to develop skills for dealing with incomplete information or intentional deception, his message explained. This is both their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. They're incredibly efficient when all variables are known, but they may struggle when faced with uncertainty they can't calculate. By late that night, Jake felt slightly more confident. He had a strategy, good advice from Earth, and a team that was starting to believe in him. But as he lay in his small cabin trying to sleep, he couldn't stop thinking about the stakes. If he won, humanity would leap forward centuries in galactic politics. If he lost, Earth would be isolated for 50 years, possibly falling so far behind that they'd never catch up. Tomorrow, everything would be decided by cards, chips, and Jake's ability to outthink beings who had mastered mathematics before humans discovered fire. He finally fell asleep wondering if he was humanity's greatest hero or its greatest fool. Jake woke up at dawn with his stomach in knots. Today was the day that would decide humanity's future. He showered, put on his best uniform, and tried to eat breakfast, but the food tasted like cardboard. His hands were shaking slightly, and he hoped no one would notice. The main amphitheater of New Vegas Station was packed. Jake had never seen so many different alien species in one place. Beings with tentacles sat next to creatures that looked like walking trees. Some aliens floated in the air, while others needed special breathing equipment. All of them had come to watch the impossible game between humans and Zephyrians. "Captain, the broadcast is reaching over 400 worlds," Tony reported. "Earth's population is basically frozen. Everyone has stopped what they're doing to watch." Dr. Lisa Harper was running last-minute calculations on her tablet. "I've analyzed their body language patterns all morning. When they're confident, they stand straighter, and their crystal bodies pulse with steady light. When they're uncertain, they dim and their posture becomes more rigid." Jake nodded, trying to absorb every piece of information. In the center of the amphitheater, a large circular table had been set up with cameras positioned to catch every angle. The cards were standard Earth playing cards, but enlarged so the alien audience could see them clearly. High Counselor Vexithera entered the amphitheater like a queen. Her crystal form caught the lights and threw rainbow patterns across the walls. Behind her came war strategist Kolventh and economic calculator Zixandra, the two greatest gaming minds in Zephyrian society. Both were taller than Vexithara and glowed with a cold blue light that made Jake's skin crawl. "Welcome, beings of the galaxy," Vexithara announced, her voice carrying easily through the amphitheater. "Today we settle a question that has existed since the first species looked at the stars. Can youth and enthusiasm overcome age and wisdom? Can luck defeat logic? We shall see." Jake walked to the table, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. The three Zephyrians took their seats across from him, their glowing eyes fixed on his face like searchlights. "The rules are simple," Vexthera continued. "Texas Hold'em poker as played by humans. Each player starts with equal chips. The game continues until one side has won all chips or after exactly 100 hands, whichever comes first. If time runs out, whoever has the most chips wins." Jake sat down and looked at his opponents. Up close, they were even more intimidating. Kolventh's crystal body was covered in sharp angles that looked like armor. Zixandra's surface was smooth but seemed to contain swirling patterns that moved like living mathematics. Both of them had small devices attached to their arms that Jake realized were probability calculators. "Let us begin," Vexthera said. The first hand was dealt. Jake looked at his cards, a 7 and a 2, different suits. The worst possible starting hand in poker. But he had expected this. The Zephyrians had probably calculated the exact sequence of cards to make his position as difficult as possible. The betting began. Kolventh looked at his cards, consulted his calculator, and bet a small amount. Zixandra did the same. When it came to Jake's turn, he looked at his terrible cards and folded immediately. "Smart play," Vexithera observed. "The human knows when he is beaten." For the next 20 hands, Jake played exactly like the Zephyrians expected. He folded bad hands, bet moderately on decent hands, and played with perfect mathematical precision. The aliens began to relax, their crystal bodies glowing with confidence. They were winning steadily, taking Jake's chips with calculated efficiency. But Jake was learning. He watched every move, every gesture, every change in their crystalline forms. Kolventh always brightened when he had strong cards and dimmed when he had weak ones. Zixandra's swirling patterns moved faster when she was confident and slower when she was uncertain. Vexthara's tells were more subtle, but Jake noticed that she leaned forward slightly when she had a good hand. By the 30th hand, Jake was down to about half his chips. The alien audience was making various sounds of approval, clearly enjoying watching the human lose. But Jake's team noticed something the others missed. He was smiling. Hand 31 changed everything. Jake was dealt a pair of kings, an excellent starting hand. But instead of betting aggressively like the math would suggest, he played it weakly, just calling the minimum bet. The flop came down with a king and 2 low cards, giving Jake 3 of a kind. Kolventh looked at his cards, consulted his calculator, and made a large bet. His crystal body was glowing brightly, indicating he had a strong hand. Zixandra folded immediately. When it came to Jake's turn, he looked uncertain, hesitated for a long moment, then called the bet reluctantly. The turn card was dealt. Another, low card that couldn't help anyone. Kolventh's glow became even brighter and he bet aggressively again. Jake acted like he was in pain, checking and rechecking his cards before finally calling the bet with obvious reluctance. The river card was dealt. Kolventh practically glowed like a star now. He pushed forward a massive bet, clearly confident he had the winning hand. Jake looked at his cards one more time, sighed heavily, and then did something that shocked everyone in the amphitheater. He went all in. The silence was complete. Kolventh's glow flickered as his calculator worked frantically. According to every mathematical model, Jake's behavior indicated a weak hand. But the size of the bet didn't match that analysis. For the first time in the game, a Zephyrian faced a decision that pure mathematics couldn't solve. Kolventh's crystal form dimmed as uncertainty crept in. He looked at his calculator, then at Jake, then back at his calculator. The device was giving him probability calculations, but it couldn't account for the human element of deception. I call, Kolventh finally said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. Jake flipped over his 3 kings. Kolventh revealed his hand, a pair of aces, a strong hand, but not strong enough. In one single hand, Jake had won back almost all of his chips. The amphitheater erupted in noise. Beings from dozens of worlds had just witnessed something unprecedented. A human had outthought a Zephyrian in a game of pure strategy. But Jake wasn't done. Now that he had shown he could bluff successfully, he began to use it as a weapon. He bluffed with weak hands, making the Zephyrians fold better cards. He played strong hands weakly, making them think he was bluffing when he wasn't. Most importantly, he made them doubt their calculations. Zixandra was the next to fall. She had been programmed to trust mathematics above all else, but Jake's unpredictable playstyle made her calculations meaningless. She began making errors, betting too much with weak hands and too little with strong ones. Within 20 hands, she was eliminated from the game. Now it was just Jake and Vexathera. The High Counselor had watched her 2 champions fall to something they couldn't understand or calculate. Her crystal form flickered with colors Jake had never seen before. He realized she was experiencing something new. Fear. Impossible, she whispered, but her voice carried across the silent amphitheater. You cannot defeat logic with chaos. I'm not using chaos, Jake replied calmly. I'm using something your computers can't calculate. I'm using understanding. As the game continued, Jake could see that Vexathara was struggling. She had lived for centuries believing that superior intellect and calculation could solve any problem. But poker wasn't about solving problems. It was about reading people, understanding their motivations, and making decisions based on incomplete information. The final showdown was approaching, and Jake knew that the next few hands would determine not just his fate, but the fate of every human being in the galaxy. High Counselor Vexithara sat across from Jake, her crystal form flickering with colors he had never seen before. The amphitheater was so quiet that Jake could hear the soft hum of the station's life support systems. 4 billion humans were watching, from Earth. Hundreds of alien species had stopped their daily activities to witness this impossible moment. Jake looked at his chips. He had more than when the game started, but Vexithara still had plenty left. This final part of the game would decide everything. He studied the ancient alien leader carefully. She was different from her 2 companions who had already lost. Where they had been predictable, she was learning to adapt. "You have surprised me, human," Vexithara said, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I did not expect your species to possess such flexibility and thinking." "We're full of surprises," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. His hands were sweating, but he couldn't let her see his nervousness. The next hand was dealt. Jake looked at his cards. Ace of Hearts and King of Hearts. An excellent starting hand, but he had learned not to trust good cards alone. In poker, the player across from you mattered more than the cards in your hand. Vexithara looked at her cards without any expression. Her crystal body maintained the same steady glow it had shown all game. She had learned to control her tells, Jake realized. She was adapting just like humans did. "I bet," she said, pushing forward a moderate stack of chips. Jake studied her carefully. Was she bluffing? Did she have a strong hand? With the other Zephyrians, he could tell. But Vexithara was different. She had watched him defeat her companions and learned from their mistakes. "I call," Jake said. The flop came down. King of Spades, 7 of Hearts, 2 of Clubs. Jake now had a pair of kings with an ace kicker. A strong hand, but not unbeatable. Vexithara looked at the community cards for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised everyone. She smiled. At least, Jake thought it was a smile. Her crystal features shifted in a way that seemed almost friendly. "Interesting cards," she said. "I bet again." This time her bet was larger. Jake felt his heart rate increase. Was she bluffing, or did she have something strong? He looked at her, crystal form, searching for any sign, any tell that might give him information. "I call," he said finally. The turn card was dealt, Queen of Hearts. Jake now had a pair of kings and a flush draw. If the next card was a heart, he would have a flush, but Vexithara was looking at the new card with what Jake could only describe as satisfaction. "I bet," she said, pushing forward even more chips. Jake's mind raced. The queen could have given her a pair of queens, or maybe she had a straight draw, or maybe she was bluffing, trying to use his own tactics against him. He looked at her crystal form again, but she maintained perfect control. "I raise," Jake said, doubling her bet. For the first time since the game began, Vexithara seemed genuinely surprised. Her crystal form flickered slightly, and Jake caught a glimpse of uncertainty before she regained control. "You are either very brave or very foolish," she said. "Maybe both," Jake replied with a grin. "I call," Vexithara said. The river card was dealt, 3 of Hearts. Jake had made his flush. 5 hearts including the ace. It was a strong hand, but in poker even strong hands could lose to stronger ones. Vexithara looked at the final card, and her crystal form went completely still. Jake watched her carefully, trying to read any sign of what she might be thinking. Then she did something that made his blood run cold. She went all in. The amphitheater erupted in noise. Beings from across the galaxy made sounds of shock and excitement. Jake stared at the massive pile of chips Vexithara had pushed forward. If he called and lost, the game was over. Humanity would be banned from space for 50 years. But if he folded, she would win a huge pot and have a commanding lead in chips. Either way, she had put him in an impossible position. Jake looked at his cards again. An ace-high flush was a very strong hand. But Vexithara's all-in bet suggested she had something even stronger. A full house maybe, or even a straight flush. "You have 30 seconds to decide," Vexithara said calmly. Jake closed his eyes and thought about everything he had learned. The Zephyrians were logical, mathematical beings. They didn't make emotional decisions. If Vexthera had gone all in, her calculations must have told her she had the winning hand. But then Jake remembered something Dr. Lisa Harper had told him. Zephyrians had never learned to lie because they shared thoughts directly. They had no experience with deception. Even if Vexthera was learning to control her tells, could she really learn to bluff convincingly in just a few hours? Jake opened his eyes and looked directly at Vexthera. "You know what I think?" he said. "I think you're scared. I think you've been watching me bluff all game and now you're trying to do the same thing. But you don't know how." Vexthera's crystal form flickered. "Your time is running out, human. I think you have a decent hand, but not a great one. Maybe 2 pair or 3 of a kind. Good enough to win most of the time, but not good enough to be confident about. So you're betting everything, hoping I'll fold." 10 seconds, Vexthera said, but Jake could hear something in her voice. Uncertainty. Jake pushed his chips forward. "I call." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the station's background hum seemed to stop. Jake flipped over his cards, showing the ace-high flush. Vexthera stared at his cards for a long moment. Then, slowly, she flipped over her own hand. Pair of queens. The amphitheater exploded in noise. Beings from hundreds of worlds were cheering, screaming, making sounds Jake had never heard before. But he barely noticed. He was staring at Vexthera, who was looking at her cards like she couldn't believe what had happened. "Impossible," she whispered. "My calculations showed a 73% probability that you would fold." "Your calculations couldn't account for something," Jake said gently. "Trust." "Trust?" "I trusted my read of you. I trusted my instincts. I trusted that even though you're incredibly intelligent, you're still learning how to deceive. And most importantly, I trusted that sometimes the best mathematical decision isn't the right human decision." Vexthera looked up at him, her crystal eyes glowing with something Jake had never seen before. "Respect. You have taught me something today, Jake Morrison," she said. "Perhaps there is more to intelligence than pure calculation." Jake gathered the chips, realizing that he had just won more than a poker game. He had won humanity's future among the stars, but looking at Vexthera's expression, he realized he might have won something even more valuable. The beginning of true understanding between species. The game wasn't over yet, but Jake knew the hardest part was behind them. Now came the real challenge. Building a relationship based on mutual respect rather than mathematical superiority. Jake had won the biggest pot of the game, but it wasn't over yet. High Counselor Vexthera still had chips left, though not many. The ancient alien leader sat quietly for a moment, her crystal form cycling through colors Jake had never seen before. The amphitheater remained silent, waiting to see what would happen next. "One more hand," Vexthera said finally. "All or nothing." Jake looked at his massive pile of chips, then at her small stack. He could play it safe, fold a few hands and let the blinds eat away at her remaining chips. But something in her voice made him reconsider. "One hand," he agreed. "Winner takes everything." The crowd erupted again. This was it. One final hand, to decide the fate of humanity's future in space. The cards were dealt. Jake looked at his hand, 7 of clubs and 2 of diamonds, the same terrible hand he had gotten in the very first round. He almost laughed at the irony. After everything he had accomplished, it might all come down to the worst possible starting hand in poker. Vexthera looked at her cards with no expression. Her crystal body glowed with its steady blue light, giving away nothing. She had learned to control her tells completely. "I will go first," she said. Without hesitation, she pushed all her remaining chips into the center of the table. All in. Jake stared at the chips. He had 2 choices. He could fold, keeping his massive advantage, and essentially guaranteeing victory. Or he could call, risking everything on one hand with terrible cards. But as he looked at Vexthera, he realized this wasn't really about the cards anymore. This was about something bigger. Throughout the game, he had shown her that humans brought something new to the galaxy. The ability to make decisions based on more than just mathematics. Now she was testing him. Would he make the safe, logical choice, or would he trust in something deeper? "You know what my cards are, don't you?" Jake said. Vexithera's crystal form flickered slightly. "I have calculated the probabilities, yes. And, you know I should fold." "According to pure mathematics, yes. You should fold and guarantee your victory." Jake looked out at the amphitheater full of alien beings from across the galaxy. They were all watching, waiting to see what the human would do. On Earth, 4 billion people held their breath. In the Zephyrian Empire, countless crystal beings watched to see if their leader would fall to human unpredictability. "But poker isn't just about mathematics," Jake said. "It's about reading people. It's about understanding what they really want, not just what they say they want." He looked directly into Vexithara's glowing eyes. "You don't want to win this hand, do you? You want to see what I'll do. You want to understand how humans think." Vexithara's crystal form went completely still. "Explain. You could have bet smaller, tried to slowly win back chips over many hands, but you went all in immediately, forcing me to make an impossible choice. You're not trying to win the game anymore. You're trying to learn something about humanity." Jake pushed his chips forward. "I call." The amphitheater fell silent. Even the soft hum of the station's system seemed to fade away. Jake had just risked everything on the worst possible hand, based purely on his read of an alien mind. The flop was dealt. King of Hearts, Queen of Spades, Jack of Diamonds. Jake's cards were still terrible. He had no pair, no draws, nothing but 7 high. But he watched Vexithera's reaction to the community cards. Her crystal form dimmed slightly when she saw the king and queen. That told him something important. The turn card, 10 of hearts. Still nothing for Jake, but now there was a possible straight on the board if someone had an ace and 9. The river card, 9 of clubs. The board now showed a possible straight. King, queen, jack, 10, 9. Anyone holding an ace would have the highest possible straight. Vexithera flipped over her cards first, ace of spades and 4 of hearts. She had made the straight, ace high. The best possible hand given the community cards. Jake looked at his 7 and 2. He had nothing. Not even a pair. According to every rule of poker, every mathematical probability, every logical analysis, he had lost. But then he smiled. "Congratulations," he said, flipping over his cards. "You win the hand." The crowd gasped. Jake had lost everything on the final hand, but Vexithara looked confused. "You called with 7 high," she said. "Why? You knew you would lose." "Because I understood what you were really asking," Jake replied. "You weren't asking if I could win at poker. You were asking if humans could make decisions that went beyond pure self-interest. You wanted to see if we could choose to trust, even when logic said we shouldn't." Vexithara stood up slowly, her crystal form now glowing brighter than Jake had ever seen. "You lost the game, Jake Morrison. According to our agreement, humanity must return to your home system." "I know," Jake said calmly. "But," Vexithara continued, her voice carrying across the silent amphitheater, "you have shown me something our calculations never predicted. You have shown me that intelligence is not just about finding the right answer. Sometimes it is about asking the right question." She turned to address the crowd. "The Zephyrian Empire hereby grants humanity full trading rights throughout our space, territorial claims to 15 star systems, and immediate membership in the Galactic Council." The amphitheater erupted in chaos. Beings from hundreds of worlds were cheering, arguing, making sounds of confusion and excitement. But Jake barely heard them. He was focused on Vexithara. "You're changing the agreement," he said. "I am evolving it," she replied. "You taught me that the most important victories are not always the ones that follow the rules. Sometimes they are the ones that change the rules entirely." Dr. Lisa Harper rushed over from the viewing area, tears streaming down her face. "Jake, do you realize what you just did? You didn't just win humanity's place in the galaxy. You changed how an entire species thinks about intelligence and decision-making. Tony Rodriguez was right behind her, grinning widely. "Captain, I think you just became the most famous human in history." But Jake was still looking at Vexathara. "What happens? Now, the High Counselor said. "You teach us about this human concept of trust, and we teach you about technologies and knowledge accumulated over thousands of years. Together, perhaps we can ask questions that neither of our species could ask alone." As the crowd slowly began to disperse, Jake realized that the poker game had been just the beginning. He had come to New Vegas Station hoping to negotiate a simple trade agreement. Instead, he had fundamentally changed the relationship between humanity and the galaxy. 6 months later, Jake stood in the same amphitheater, but now it had been converted into a diplomatic training center. Young humans and Zephyrians sat at tables together, learning poker not as a game, but as a way to understand how different forms of intelligence could work together. "The key," Jake explained to his mixed class of alien diplomats, "is not to calculate the odds of winning. It's to understand what winning really means." In the front row, a young Zephyrian raised her crystalline hand. "But how do you make decisions without complete information?" Jake smiled. "You trust. You observe. You remember that sometimes the most logical choice isn't the most human choice. And sometimes being human is exactly what the galaxy needs." Outside the windows, ships from dozens of worlds moved peacefully through space, carrying goods, ideas, and dreams between civilizations that had learned to trust each other. And at the center of it all was a simple truth. Sometimes the best way to win is to show your opponents that victory itself can be redefined.